Federalist 54, Part 3, Paragraph 8. As we have talked in the past couple of parts of this Federalist, Madison takes the persona of a non-Southerner and starts coding this Southern person, and in order to share with Northerners how majority of Southerners that have grown around slaves or are slaveholders look at the Constitution and see the 3/5 clause that gives the Southerners in a way an advantage, because it counts the enslaved people of the South as 3/5 of a person, and in this sense it gives them more of a representation in the House of Representatives. So Madison acts like a non-Southerner, even though he's from the South himself. He's a slaveholder, but he says, look at how the slaveholders would look at this issue, and that's why we had to make this compromise. So paragraph 8, after all, may not another ground be taken on which this article of the Constitution will admit of a still more ready defense. We have hitherto proceeded on the idea that representation related to persons only and not at all to property. But is it a just idea? Government is instituted no less for protection of the property than of the persons of individuals. The one as well as the other, therefore, may be considered as represented by those who are charged with the government. Upon this principle, it is that in several of other states, and particularly in the state of New York, one branch of the government is intended more specially to be the guardian of property, and is accordingly elected to that part of the by that part of the society which is most interested in the subject of government. In the federal Constitution, this policy does not prevail. The right of property are committed into the same hands with the personal rights. Some attention ought, therefore, to be paid to property in the choice of those hands. Again, remember, property and just the idea of justice at that time were much more intertwined. So 2 centuries ago, when they talked of property, they were talking of idea of justice. When they used the word justice, they're talking about not just justice in the sense that we talk about it today, but also justice in a way that your contracts have to be honored. If you're a debtor, you have to pay your debt. So that was more intertwined in this idea and this vocabulary. That's why part 1, I said, it is true that in the Declaration of Independence, they changed the words of John Locke from life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And we're glad they did that. But that idea of property being sacrosanct was still there. So here he's again telling, as a Southerner, he says, look, you guys believe just like we do that government is instituted to protect your property too, as well as your life. It's as important. So we Southerners want our property protected. We want to have fair representation in this House of Representatives, at least the way we see things. And look, even you yourselves in New York, you have 2 branches in your legislature, and the qualifications for running in the upper branch shows that you have a mechanism by choosing this upper branch to give property holders a bigger say, at least as far as these 2 branches go, because you want property to be secure and right. So we in the South, he says, we look at our enslaved people as a property. So we want the same thing from the federal government. So we'll continue. For another reason, the votes followed in the federal legislature to the people of each state ought to bear some proportion to the comparative wealth of the states. States have not, like individuals, an influence over each other, arising from superior advantages of fortune. If the law allows an opulent citizen, a rich citizen, but a single vote in the choice of his representative, the respect and consequence which he derives from his fortunate situation very frequently guide the votes of others to the objects of his choice, and through his imperceptible channel the rights of property are conveyed into the public representation. A state possesses no such influence over other states. It is not probable that the richest state in the Confederacy will ever influence the choice of a single representative in any other state, nor will the representatives of the larger and richer states possess any other advantage in the federal legislature over the representatives of other states than what may result from their superior number alone. As far, therefore, as their superior wealth and weight may justly entitle them to any advantage, it ought to be secured to them by a superior share of representation. The new Constitution, in this respect, materially different from the existing Confederation, as well as from that of the United Netherlands and other similar confederacies. In each of the latter, the efficacy of federal resolutions depends on the subsequent and voluntary resolutions of the states composing the Union. Hence, the states, though possessing an equal vote in the public councils, have an unequal influence corresponding with the unequal importance of these subsequent and voluntary resolutions. Under the proposed Constitution, the federal acts will take effect without the necessary intervention of individual states. They will depend merely on the majority of the votes in the federal legislature, and consequently each vote, whether proceeding from a larger or smaller state, or a state more or less wealthy or powerful, will have an equal weight and efficacy. In the same manner as the votes individually given in a state legislature by the representatives of unequal counties or other districts have each a precise equality of value and effect. Or if there be any difference in the case, it proceeds from the difference in the personal character of individual representative, rather than from any regard to the extent of the district from which he comes. Well, he's already told us in the last few Federalists what the advantages of new Constitution was, how it was better than the old Constitution that we are trying to replace, or the Constitution of United Netherlands. We already talked about that. And here he's saying the way the new Constitution is written, just like in every state, people of different counties, their votes count the same. Every state is divided into counties. So in the United States, every state will be just like the county. So their vote, regardless of whether it's a wealthy state, a poor state, a populous state or not, it's going to be count as equal to the vote of a state who is rich or is so much bigger or whatever else you want to talk about. So again, he's going through all of this just trying to say that we had to make this compromise about counting the enslaved people as 3/5 of a person and give the Southerners this advantage, so that they get the number of representatives they get to the House of Representatives. House of Representatives will also count those enslaved people. In the previous video, I mentioned the series Eyes on the Prize on PBS. Make sure you watch it. I think it just covers 5-6 decades ago. It covers 1940s, 50s, 60s, and it's pretty graphic. It's a good story. You learn a lot about America at that time and how far we were from being really a just and fair society. And listen to the talks of Taylor Branch. If you don't get a chance to read the books, at least watch his talks. And he tells you how the South, by segregating the African American population, it affected them in many more negative ways. How women were shortchanged, how they couldn't serve in juries. Of course, that was true in a lot of places, but he gives you examples of how they were holding themselves back for decades this way. Till finally, we had the civil rights movement, and America started living up to its promise. So when we read these dark paragraphs about slavery and how they had to have a compromise in the Constitution, it is good to honor the people who took part in the civil rights movement, all the people that before even the civil rights movement as a movement started, took part in making sure that this country lives up to its promise. After all, remember that so many white Americans died in the Civil War. And had that not happened, the issue of slavery would have lingered on much longer. So we can also honor the sacrifice of all those people who died in the American Civil War. And as a result of it, the South was put in its place. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were adopted, and that started America on a better path.